So a couple of days ago, a track that was released over 11 years ago, 2014, 2015. The song is Trap Queen by Fetty Wap. So, a hip-hop classic, a rap classic, huge at the time, still remained relevant throughout. I'm pretty sure there were some TikTok trends around the track a couple of years ago. Fair to say it's been relevant, right? But a couple of days ago, this track, which bear in mind is over 11 years old, had its biggest ever streaming day, its biggest ever day on streaming platforms. The most amount of times it's been streamed in one day on streaming platforms, with over 1.4 million streams in a single day. Now, that was more than it ever had, even during release, even during its peak. And I wanted to do this video, I wanted to do this quick explainer, just because this isn't, this is the epitome, this is the perfect example of the importance of catalogue and why artists cannot sleep on catalogue. And even more so when we get into this hit and we learn about it, this hit was a sleeper hit, what they call a sleeper hit. People slept on it initially, right? It didn't have that initial success. But 11 years later, it's getting the most streams it's ever got. So we're gonna break into it. We're gonna break this down. But I initially saw this piece of news, and I really wanted to talk about it. I initially saw it reported by Complex over on Twitter, on X, and they shared this tweet, and essentially it was basically Trap Queen by Fetty Wap earns its biggest streaming day with over 1.1 million streams on Spotify. So again, that number solely on Spotify. It was reported elsewhere as well, by the likes of Fire in the Booth as well, who posted about it having its biggest ever streaming day, which I just thought was insane. Just knowing that, this track, how old it was, where it came from, 11 years later, still being streamed so much and having its biggest streaming day 11 years later is insane, right? To break that all-time high streaming record so long after. And unless I've missed something, no real no real sort of huge amount of activity around it. Again, like I said, I think there was a bit of a TikTok trend with it a year or so ago with the track, and obviously that's probably continued a little bit. But the fact that this isn't coming from any sort of push or agenda, from as far as we know, as far as I can see, again, it speaks to the importance of catalogue and how vital it is for artists to not sleep on the catalogue. So that's what's happened. I could verify the numbers as well, so I looked it up a little bit to just confirm streaming numbers. So this is the Spotify streams for the track. I might have to zoom out a little bit on this just so you can see the chart. But essentially, this is the Spotify stream count of the track over the past month. And as you can see now, the total on as of January 19th is 1.5 billion, 5,434,170, which, as you can see, is a huge jump from January 18th. I think, to be fair, I think that's probably even more than 1.4 million, but that's what they're reporting on. But it looks like there was even more in that day. And as you can see over the past month here, the average, it might be a little bit small, but the average daily change within the past month for this track has been 732,000. So on average, it may be doing about 700,000 streams per day. But that's almost pretty much double that number in a day, right? So really impressive. The numbers check out probably even more so than we expect here. So definitely something that I thought or considered worthwhile looking into. Now, why is this so impressive? Well, I don't know how many people know about the history of this track, Fetty Wap Trap Queen. Obviously, a huge viral hit. I remember banging it when it came out. I was in uni, and it was just, it was the perfect time for that track to come out. And I think I don't really need to speak on how much of a sensation it was when it came out, because people know, like, especially if you're in rap and hip hop, you're a consumer, you're in the culture, you appreciated it. Like, it was a huge hit. The interesting thing is that it actually, like I said earlier, was a sleeper hit. It was a hit that didn't hit initially. a lot of these tracks in the charts, they hit straight away. They've got a big push, a big agenda with them. They've got marketing budgets, they got PR, they got socials, digital, international, they got all this stuff, right? This came out and it just didn't go for a while, and we'll break into it, but you know, it ended up peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It spent 25 weeks in the top 10, I believe, as well, and it earned Grammy nomination in 2016, the year after it came out. It was really one of the most defining tracks. And I said I'm not going to explain it, but I have to, because it was such a, you know, it was such a huge deal at the time, right? And now we're talking over a decade later, and it's doing the biggest numbers it's ever done. That's true catalog power at its peak, right? That's true catalog power at its peak. Now, let's get into the history of the track a little bit. And I was reading up on this, on the history of Trap Queen and how it actually came to be. And there was a few things that I learned, and I found it quite interesting as well, in the sense that, like I said, this initially wasn't a release that was, really successful initially and pushed initially, and it actually was conceived, the idea of the track, the concept of the track, or the track itself, was actually in its original form was conceived back in 2023. So we're talking even a longer time ago, right? And this was this checked out on Wikipedia, so Wikipedia is as reliable as it can be, but this checked out, and essentially we can see here that WAP conceived Trap Queen in late 2013 and recorded the song to the following March, so that would have been 2014, after hearing what would become its backing track, which had been produced by Tony Fad, a musician from Belarus. The track backing was released free for download. It was set on recording, which WAP sung, and he was anxious to try something different. Now, the original studio recording consisted of 3 sung verses that WAP had freestyled in the melody he had written. The recording was uploaded to SoundCloud shortly after in March 2014. So this is the first time that it became publicly available, in the sense that people could listen to it, and it was the first iteration, and it soon began amassing plays. An extended version of the initial recording was included on WAP's Up Next mixtape, which was initially sold in local was initially sold locally in Paterson, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, and later released online. This version of the song was also independently released on April 2nd, 2014 as a standalone digital single under Goodfella for Life Entertainment. So, as you can see here, the track already had a life of its own before it hit the masses, before it hit the mainstream. And it was a sleeper because it hadn't initially gained that huge amount of popularity that we eventually saw it to become. Typically what you see with a lot of, hit singles, hit records, is that the first month or couple months are really when the majority of plays happen, and we call it a hit, but then it sort of falls off a little bit, and then it dies down eventually. And as you see it a lot in a lot of campaigns, and so this isn't the case. This is basically the opposite here. Then it goes on to just talk about how that he initially thought it was a hit before recording the song, and it amassed streaming counts on SoundCloud. And then eventually, within its first few months online, it increased to over 1 million plays on SoundCloud. To take advantage of the increased attention the song was receiving, a revised version was subsequently made for radio, which shortened the total runtime and included an additional rap verse following the first iteration of the chorus. In November 2014, WAP and RGF Productions partnered with Leo and his label 300 Entertainment to give it a fully fledged commercial release. So this is what I'm saying, right? So from March to November, yes, it generated a certain amount of buzz, but it wasn't the hit we thought it would be, right? Or at least what Fetty Wap thought it would be. I've already gone through how successful it ended up being. But the important thing to note here, and what I'm talking about basically here, is the fact that it wasn't what he wanted it to be initially. It didn't have that initial streaming consumption that he really wanted it to have, or he thought it could have the potential to have, which he actually ended up being right about, right? And so it for me, it's the epitome, and it highlights this big shift in how things work in the streaming era, and how the fact that over 10 years later, despite the popularity of the song, it's having its biggest streaming day to date, catalog first, catalog before new singles. Songs don't expire the way that they used to, and I think the fact that we're able to listen in a streaming landscape to a track that can come back, grow, and set new peaks years after its release, like decade after its release, that used to be very rare, and that used to come from predominantly, I'd say, syncing or sort of cultural moments, or even like post-mortem, you know. Now it's becoming the norm. Now it's becoming catalog first. Now it's becoming the I'm sure there's a bunch of stats we can look about on this, and there's a bunch of data that would prove this point. But essentially now, catalog is the bread and butter of the music business. Catalog is basically how people are eating, how people are able to fend for themselves, how people are able to generate revenue. That is how it's working, and this is the perfect example of that. This is the epitome of that. A track that was released 11 years ago by a rapper who, fair to say, is not really in the limelight too much more within rap music for whatever reasons, and we can talk about that again in another video. But his track that was released 11 years ago is now basically having its biggest streaming days in its history, right? So this is the first thing, and this is the main lesson for artists, that don't sleep on catalog. Like, as soon as a track is done, it doesn't mean the campaign is done. It doesn't mean that it's over. It doesn't mean that the potential for that track, because it didn't do what you wanted it to do, can't do that in future, right? The second thing is that we're seeing a huge amount of acquisitions in catalog, and again, it's something I want to cover a lot of. It's something I'd love to do more videos on and take more time to research and actually prepare proper breakdowns, right? But this is exactly why we're seeing it. Like, in general, catalog acquisition is a safe bet because the amount of income that is generated can be predicted, you know, and these finance companies that are investing, you know, and the labels that are selling, or the artists and management companies that are selling, they have a backlog of proven income generated from this catalog, and they know on average how many streams it's going to do a month. They have their core fan base, they have their core consumption, and then that is sort of projected for the next 10 years. You get a figure, you put a multiplier on it, and then you sell that for 8-10 times, you know, and that's what's happening with these acquisitions. The beauty of it is that these things can also happen. Like one of those tracks in those catalogs that have been purchased could pop off even more, and that projected revenue is then less than the actual now, you know. And so again, it's almost, yes, it's a safe bet, but it's almost the fact that it's also gambling. Like, you don't know what could actually happen, and that's without sort of any activity, as we said. Again, I might have missed any sort of catalog activity around Trap Queen. I know things happened on TikTok a year or so ago, or maybe even more, maybe less, I can't remember exactly, but that's without that push. Imagine with that push, with the sync, with the placements in the Netflix series, the most viral Netflix series, or whatever it is, the ads, or whatever it is, right? Whatever activity, marketing activity is happening. Older hits keep earning, but sometimes they can earn even more than they initially did. And that's the lesson in this, right? That's what artists should hold on to and remember during those struggle periods, but also during the success periods. Like, it is all about catalog, and it's no longer an afterthought part of revenue. It's no longer a reissue department in the back of the building of the label offices, right? It's the backbone of long-term streaming income for artists, for record labels, for management companies. And the third thing that I wanted to sort of break down for the artists is that this is a reminder of patience paying off, you know. Trap Queen's resurgence is, again, like I said, the perfect example of, if a song is great, listeners will find it. Money will come, streams will happen. It's the life cycle of how things work. It's music, it's long and it's fluid, it has a long tail. So it's your responsibility to be able to make sure that you're optimizing everything you can to make the most of that. So I wanted to break that down. You know, it's I found it such an interesting story. I think, you know, because it was such a massive cultural impact, that track in hip hop, and it was a defined moment in rap, and it's still referenced a lot today. You know, it was dope, man, and I think I just really enjoyed the fact that it's being streamed even more now than ever, despite being so old. You know, it's a lesson that, you know, you can't sleep on your back catalogue. Streaming is not linear, despite what we're told, and despite what is the case a lot of the time, it isn't always going to happen that way. And also the fact that, you know, the industry is adapting to a certain amount, and, you know, we should too, as people in and around or with interest in the industry. Catalogs are worth a lot more than you might think, and building up your rights ownership is the way forward. So this isn't just about nostalgia. Yes, probably plays a part, but this is proof of how streaming can really reshape a musical work's lifespan, an artist's lifespan, their catalog's lifespan. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. What do you think this says about the future of music? You know, why do you think this has happened with Trap Queen and Fetty Wap? Drop your thoughts below and let me know, you know, which catalogue tracks you think should happen or could happen or deserves to be happened to. Considering this has happened to, obviously, you know, probably one of my favourite tracks within rap, just out of good energy, you know. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Appreciate the love and support. Please like, comment and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.